I'm Russ Kickle, and on this episode of American Reef, we're going to continue our conversation with Shane from SBB Corals. So if you haven't checked out part one of the discussion with Shane, it's definitely worth your time. He goes over some tips and tricks that allow him to grow not only the most colorful and hardiest corals on the internet, right? But he goes over these tips and tricks that I haven't really heard, like most of the hobbyists say. And I've been doing this for decades, right? One simple one, for example, is how he relies on that RODI membrane, right, and changing that membrane very frequently, because he noticed when, we'll say TDS, for example, of 0 with a new membrane versus a TDS of 0 with an older, I'll call it spent membrane, his polyp extensions are much greater, right, when it's the new filter versus the old filter. So that's why he's constantly changing those out. And there are some tips and tricks in there like that that, again, I just never heard over the decades, which, again, it's proven because you can just check out his corals and you can see what he's got to offer, right? Again, some of the best are there. So, again, one of those recipes that's worth listening to and understanding the principles behind it. Speaking of which, again, if you need to buy some reef keeping products, check out my sponsors, Bulk Reef Supply, Premium Aquatics. Again, great, honest companies that deserve a chance to earn your business, right? And if you need, again, a great product from those guys, right, check out Tunzi. Again, I've always said that basically time only proves companies and products to be good, and Tunzi's been around for decades. So, again, that should say something about them, right? And the fact that, again, they have great products is just a benefit because most of you already know Roger out there. And again, Roger's a good, honest guy who, again, deserves your business because, again, we want to support those people in the hobby who help make it a better place. So with that being said, I believe Shane is one of those people that make it a better place. And let's hear what Shane has to say on this episode of American Reef.
So from a business end, you've already described what you're doing that's kind of separates you there. Is there anything else that you would think, again, that kind of separates you from everybody else, that's why your stuff is way more colorful, or it, again, you've had more success, that kind of thing?
That's a good one. I mean, it's hard to say with the color stuff. I mean, I think we might have gotten lucky, maybe. I mean, the way we run I mean, because there's really I can't tell you how
right
our coral. I wish I could, I wish I had like a seesaw where I could say, if I do this, the colors will get better. And I haven't seen that. I can tell you we're constantly chasing that also, whatever that is.
right
And, part of that is, how do you figure that out faster? And that's kind of another reason why we have 4 separate systems, is because we can learn 4 times as fast, maybe, right, of what will work or what won't work. And each of our systems, I mean, has their mini crashes. Like, by no means do we have like 7-year long-term, nothing's crashed. Like, it happens all the time. But at least if it does happen, why did it happen? Why didn't it happen with the other tanks? So that's really helped us as well. But in terms of the colors and stuff like that, I mean, I'm not sure how we again. I mean,
well,
we use radions. I mean, I don't know.
Well, to your point, it's something that you're always chasing, right? Yeah. I mean, again, and I know I refer to Mike a lot, but to him, I know that he'll look at your corals and he just goes gaga over them, right? Because of the colors and, and the different, basically, variations, etc. But he's also, again, man, if we can do this just a little bit better, right? Or something like always, right? So to maybe to your point, that characteristic, right? Never being satisfied.
That could hurt us too, though, because again, it goes back to my thing I said earlier about changing things in your system. You really don't. So like, we want to do better, but we're changing something. So something else is going to go wrong. So yeah, it's a battle. Another thing with the colors though, which is a very interesting one, is I think some people actually have good colors already, and they may not know how to look for those colors. It's a weird concept, but you know, I think some people have to really like almost train their eyes on like how to see the color. Because, you know, let's be straight. I mean, if you look at the coral under a normal daylight, how, you know, we grow under the AB plus schedule radion. If you look at the coral, you're not going to see much color under that spectrum. You're not going to see it in my tank. You're not going to see it in your tank. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like there's, you know, the 1%, like the top select pieces, the tenuous, the torches, they're going to look ridiculous even under regular lighting. But, you know, most people have to train their eye, right? Whether it's, you know, looking at it under that blue spectrum, or, you know, whether it's, you know, putting the glasses on, putting it onto the blue spectrum, identifying the color, then taking the glasses off, re-looking at their corals, and they'll see that color there. So some people out there have great color, they just don't know how to see it. So I tell them that, and they say, oh, wow, you're right. You know, our corals are looking great. Another thing with the color, we collect a lot. You know, we're collecting a lot of tenuous, we're collecting a lot of torches, and when we collect, like, we try to find the corals with the nicest colors. So whether we've collected in, you know, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 tenuous, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of them die off due to, you know, survival of the fittest of when they come in, or whatever you want to call it. So, you know, they get weeded out, you know, and what you're left with, some of them has no color. Some of them has great color. Some of them has ridiculous color. So, you know, it might just be that we're collecting a lot. So we're able to show those top 1% of the colors in those corals. So maybe that's why some of our colors might be better than others. You know, it's hard to say. So it's tough to answer.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because basically there was a lab over at Ohio State, right, Bertolli's lab, where what they would do was exactly that, meaning they kind of, I don't know how to actually describe it, but the way that she described it was the fact that all corals come from different, again, genetic histories, right? And some genetic histories just aren't designed for color or for growth or for whatever, but you will find colonies that do have that genetic history. And when you do, that's, you know, that's the ones, right? And you know, knowing that, okay, this generation, 2 generations behind, 3 generations behind, right? Because they were doing some coral growth studying, this, that, and the other, and it just happened to be for the corals in Hawaii, for example, that they were looking at. And so your point is dead on, at least to there. It's, you know, just like we are as humans, right? Again, some of us, you know, our families are or basically, I don't want to say are more likely to get diabetes or whatever, but they just are, right? It's in your genome thing. So it makes sense. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think a lot of people mention that.
It's that top 1%. I mean, there's, you know, there's some like tenuous. Again, my passion is always tenuous. Even though I love them all, my number one, right, you know, passion, though, if you will, of the niche is the tenuous. I mean, some of them are just glowing, and some of them, they just have no color. You know, for a year, they're in my tank, 2 years, and they still have no color. Some of them are stunted. Some of them don't even grow. Some of them have great polyps. I mean, so it's you're really getting that broad stock. It makes a huge difference with the colors and the polyp extension.
Cool. So you mentioned stock. How many, if you had to guess how many pieces you have in your 4 systems, how many you got today?
There's a lot. I mean, you could look at the videos and you can kind of see, we really overpack our tanks, and we're limited on space still. I mean, we still are running out of space. So, I mean, I told everyone, like, I'm not expanding anymore right now. Like, we have to just do what we have, but we'll see what happens. Right. Just started a new 600-gallon system, as I mentioned, for more space. But yeah, go back to videos. I mean, it's probably hundreds of pieces. I mean, it's not 1,000 pieces. You're just, you could try to count every one, but we've never done it before.
Multiple hundreds though, so
Yeah.
it's not the normal. So with that being said, okay, you said you had 4 systems. You're starting another one, or
We have 3 right now. In one of the videos, you'll see there's one. The 4th system is just all live rock. So that's a 600-gallon system. It's 3 180s plumbed together. 3 sumps on the bottom, all plumbed together. Just because we're limited on space, we kind of have to put the tanks against like 3 walls in a room. So we have to kind of cobble them all together with sumps, and you'll see how they're plumbed out. But yeah, that tank, we kind of want it to be our show tank. So there's no racks in that tank. We really want to take like the top of the best 1% and kind of plant them in that tank as like a show tank. Because the way we've been growing, we've been selling a lot, so we haven't really had like the show tank that we just let like grow out, limitlessly. So that'll be fun to follow, over the years. I don't know how long, but hopefully we can keep that as a show tank and not like level it as like another, just like fit as many as you can in your tank.
Yeah, amen to that, right? Okay, so with that being said, when you were designing this, right, this system compared to what you already have in place, right, what were some of the things you wanted to fix, so to speak?
Good point. You'll see all of our systems they're all the same, actually. They're all similar. We have kind of come up with a model that we feel like does work best. And it's a model where simple is the best. Okay. What we mean by that is like, we don't use a UV sterilizer. We don't feel like it's needed. We don't use carbon. We don't feel like it's needed. We don't use GFO. Definitely not needed. It will leach chemicals in your tank after it absorbs all the PO4, which is crazy. And then once you change it out, you'll have a mini spike because your PO4 will bottom out. Like, it's just, to me, all those things I mentioned just create mini cycles when you change stuff out. It costs money. It's a pain to change those things out. You don't need them. So, basically all of our systems, all they have for filtration is a lot of live rock. They have a skimmer, and that's it. We don't use any other type of filtration. We do 15% water changes every week. So all these systems, including the new 600, is designed that way. So it's just, I think learning how to keep a very clean system so you don't need those things. So that way, if the way you keep your systems, like the PO4 and the NO3 might be very low, you can then dose them up using those elements to get them where you want. So that new system is set up very similar to the other systems that way. So yeah, that's basically how they're all set up.
Okay, so simple is the best approach. You said you do 15% kind of water changes. So weekly? So
every week, yes.
Okay, week. Obviously, you're shipping corals out too. So how much in that percentage of water gets shipped out for that complete picture?
I mean, so here's the thing. Like, we believe water changes are good. The more, the better. In some tanks, we've done 50% water changes, like, and everything is fine. So we do 15% water change every week on a Friday, which is from our vats, from the 200-gallon drum. That's 15% every week. And then in terms of shipping, I don't know. I mean, we're probably pulling out 30 gallons a week, 40 gallons a week of shipping. And that's okay. We don't really factor that into the water changes. But yeah, I mean, with that, maybe we're doing 20% per week.
Okay.
So we do them on all 4 systems. So it's not like we skimp on one just to see how that one does.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, because, as you know, through my videos, it's been, I do, again, roughly 2-gallon water change on each system a day. It just automates and goes. And, again, for me, that's been the easiest way. That way, I do it for lazy reasons. I don't want to have to test, right? I don't have enough time to breathe, so to speak, as it is. So for me, I just do the water changes and things kind of work out okay, right? know.
You know what? I also believe too, like if you're, experienced and like I don't necessarily think you have to test every day. Honestly, like if you're doing your routine and like you should know what your parameters are without testing, right? Like you said, if you do a 2 minute a day automatic water change and you feed the exact amount every day, you don't necessarily need to test. And like I do it, we do it on all our systems just because we have the resources to do it, and we don't, it is a business, so we have to
Well, right.
on it. But for a lot of the hobbyists, like once you really get it down, like, and again, you have minimal changes, like you're not changing VFO, so your PO4 is not going up and down. Like you don't have to really test every day. So it makes sense what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, to me, it was just it's more for ease. Right. And, again, sometimes, as you know, you get arrogant the longer you're in the hobby. So I'm kind of like, I just won't change anything. It'll be fine. Right.
So you know what you just said? People get very, very arrogant about changing their RODI membrane. And it's just one of those things where they just forget to do it. So yeah, even though like you might have like an autopilot system, like you got to always stay humble and make sure that you're checking like the most important things, at least the RODI, because people have literally told me my SPS is dry. I'm saying dry as in like no polyps and just super,
right.
They look dry. I tell them to change their membrane and literally a month later they go, holy man, like anyone who's watching this video, like maybe there's someone out there, and just put it in the comments that happened to you, and people are shocked. Like it is that much of a difference.
And it makes so much sense though. Like I said, I've never heard anybody do, but when you mentioned it, it just, because there's things you don't test. TDS is total dissolved solids. There's probably bacteria in there that you have no clue that you're not testing for. I mean, that you can't test for other things. I mean, it makes so much sense changing that membrane. It does.
And here's the thing: there's two extremes to that, though, right? Like we change our membrane every 2 months. Okay, it's an extreme. You might not have to do it. Whatever. We got to be proactive, so it never gets to the point of no return. But listen, if you go right now and go look at your system, and if your membrane, if you pull it out and that thing is brown, you haven't changed it for 2 years. Like that's an obvious one. If you look at your sediment filter, and the sediment filter is like any color, like we like our sediment filter to stay white. If your sediment filter is, the smallest shade of brown, it's too late. Like you're gonna go right now and you're gonna say, wow, my membrane is, and you're gonna change it out and you're gonna be great. Now here's one other tip though for that. When you change out your full components, I personally burn off 50 gallons of water to let that system fully work its way through before I use the source water. So burn off 50 gallons of water anytime you change anything, because even though you're making water, it's got to go through and flush out the carbon block and all that crap. That's another tip as well. But that's the number one thing. You'll hear me talk about that again probably later.
Perfect. Well, okay, so but your goals still make sense. Clean, right? Clean systems. So, okay, so you said from a filtration side of it, how you kind of keep it clean. Do you oversize the skimmers or anything like that, or are they normal? How do you approach that?
So they're not oversized. Actually, they're probably a little undersized. I would actually like to get oversized ones, but if you look at the videos of our systems, you'll see that there's no more room for a larger skimmer. So we've actually maximized, the only skimmer we could get. Like we were considering maybe putting 2 skimmers on a system, but we were able to get by with the ones we have, which, they're like, we have a 500-gallon system. The skimmer is rated for 500 gallons, right? But, with the bio load that we have, with the amount of corals that we have packed in, we probably could use bigger skimmers. I don't necessarily know what a skimmer pulls out. Like I haven't tested for it to see what it is, but yeah, if you get the one rated right for the amount of gallons you have, you should be able to get by.
Right.
But that actually, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, what is a skimmer, right? It pulls out excess nutrients. So this goes into a whole nother, topic of, how are you able to minimize, not using GFO, not using carbon, not using a UV, how are you able to do that? And we also don't use Kato, by the way. We feel that Kato completely strips the system of good nutrients like iron. Like your corals need iron, but if you have a chaeto like huge, like you're going to strip your system. So we don't use chaeto because it grows so fast. And you know, we don't need it. I mean, having it in the system, we find that our colors actually look worse because it strips the system. So it goes into how do you get into that whole cycle.
Right. Well, and it's so funny too, because again, as you're going through it, I know through the years talking to various people, whether it's Sanjay, whoever, when they support your exact statements, meaning when they added whatever carbon, right, or they added chaeto, whatever, things would dull down, they would dry out, they just, again, the polyps weren't extending, and vice versa. From simple things like xenia and iodine, right, they wouldn't pulse. Have the right, you know, level of iodine, they pulsed, right? So makes sense.
Hold on.
So, okay, so on that general kind of what you're doing, how about lighting, right? Because everybody gets wrapped around the axle on lighting, right? What's your general opinions on that?
And we try to keep it as simple as possible, lowest maintenance as possible, and we just use radions. You know, we radion G4s, radion G5s, and we're probably going to be forced now to use the G6s. To be completely honest, we like the G4s the best. You know, we like them the best. I don't know why. For me, it looks like they take the best pictures. We take our pictures on radion, and you know, we always use radion. We've never tested anything else, so that's why I say, you know, maybe we got lucky using the radions because they color barcode. Everything we have is grown on the radion. Maybe we got lucky. But looking now, like people say, oh, why don't you try this or why don't you try that? I don't want to try metal halides. I don't want to change them out every month or 2 months, or, you know, oh, you should get the Reef Bright strips. I don't want to change those out. I think you have to change them out every once in a while. You know, we've seen great results with the radions, so we just stick with the radions, and they're very easy to adjust. You could adjust the spectrum. You could adjust. People always ask, oh, what's your, you know, lighting schedule? That's probably the next thing, you know, oh, we just use the AB plus schedule. Very simple. We don't, zero change. We don't change it at all. The lights are, you know, they come on at 11 a.m. They go off at 9 p.m. They go straight up and then they go straight down. No like crazy ramp up period. And in terms of lights, you know, on our SPS tanks, we like one light per foot. So you'll see on a 6-foot tank, we have 6 lights. You know, on an 8-foot tank, we have 8 lights. Those are for the SPS. We keep the corals, I would say, at about 12 to 14 inches under the water line. And then just like your tank in the background there, we have our lights like kind of on those rails, on those hooks. Those are, I believe, about 8 inches above the water. So the corals are sitting maybe 20, 25 inches under the lights. We run our intensity at 72%. And that gives a sweet spot for the SPS. It's 400 par. Is what we keep that SPS in. And then for all the mushrooms, we keep them in 100 par. You'll notice one system that we have, it's just a 180. You'll see there's gonies and mushrooms in there. There's only one radion per 2 feet. So in each section, there's one radion. And on that tank, we like to keep the gonies and the mushrooms at like 100 par. For the torches, I mean, believe it or not, torches can handle like 300, 350 par. So a lot of the torches we're just blasting with the same radions. We keep them at like 300 par, maybe like 60% intensity is good for the torches. And, you know, that's our lighting schedule. But for everyone else out there, I mean, you know, when you talk about lighting schedules and pars, it also kind of does correlate with, you know, nutrients, I believe, in your tank.
Right. Well, and to your point, you want to keep it clean, but not pristine, right? So what are you dosing, or, you know, since you're stripping everything out, how are you dosing to make sure that, again, you know, you kind of get the key, you know, whether it's phosphates or whatever, up to the levels that you want?
Yeah, so you mentioned stripping. You know, we don't necessarily strip anything out because, well, what we strip out is, you know, the mechanical equipment that we don't need, right? Like the UV sterilizer, the carbon indicator, whatever. We strip that, take that out.
Right.
But see, now this is an interesting one, and this is probably how me and you originally met. And this is a huge, you know, I probably take this for granted now because I've been doing it since day one. You know, like, and the way I found it is, you know, I'm doing research, looking at YouTube videos. You know, I came across Mike Paletta, obviously huge in the industry, follow pretty much, the miracle mud. We still use it to this day. But in one of those videos, with you and, I don't know if it was you and Mike, but it was definitely you, you demonstrated how you feed your fish, with the AmericanReef HPD. And again, that might have been one of the things I got lucky with early on, is discovering AmericanReef, the way you feed. And the way that it works is, you hang the food from a bag. You'll see in a video that I put up as well. We show the fish eating, very similar to your videos, actually. We had them feeding in there. But the idea is that when you make the food, it hangs in a bag, and the fish literally, there's no waste at all. Like every time the fish picks on the bag, the only food that comes off is what goes right in his mouth. It's like, so by doing it that way, we don't like throw like live shrimp in there or pellets or flakes. Like that stuff gets everywhere. Like that stuff gets in your rocks, it gets in your pumps, it gets in your, it gets in your sump. Like little piece of food can get trapped in a rock and cause decay, which causes ammonia, which causes maybe PO4, causes NO3. Like you can't get to that stuff. So this way that you have taught to feed, like nothing goes anywhere, only goes in their bellies. So that's how we control our nutrients, because by doing that, your PO4 will probably be like close to like 0.02. Your NO3 will be probably close to 0. Like I'm going to warn you all right now, but that's how we're able to not use GFO, because our PO4 stays down. That's how we don't use carbon. That's why we don't need Keto, because there's not like all this excess crap. And then we control it now. We bring it up. We bring up our PO4. We like at 0.12. Our NO3, we like at 15. And the only way we're going to bring it back up to those levels is dosing. We use neophos and neonitro. I mean, you can use, actually for NO3 now, we have our own formula because it's too expensive with the, like we're dosing like 60 mil a day of neo. It was too much, it was like 100 mil a day. So we could create our own formula, but that's the thing. So people say, people like dirty tanks, NO3 and PO4, they consider a dirty element or whatever. Those things aren't dirty. What dirty is the detritus that's in your tank that's killing, so that's how we keep a really clean system, is feeding with the AmericanReef HPD, to be honest. That's how we do it.
Checks in the mail.
Yeah, no, that's the secret. It really is. And I tell people that, I mean, I don't know. It's the truth. That's how we feed. I mean, how much we order from you, so much of this, right? Like,
right. It's so funny though, because to your point, like to me, like we talked about before, it's all just common sense to me. You do the same thing with water and the RODI, right? Why do you want to throw in stuff that, again, gets trapped and everything else? So to your point, like to me, it makes sense. But the flip side too, like you had mentioned before, I really believe everybody has different recipes for success, right? And they all depend on certain things, obviously. It's kind of a domino thing, right? So, what works for you works because they followed, or you're following a complete recipe versus, picking and choosing. Paletta does this, Sanjay does this, Shane does this. Well, that might not necessarily work, right? So, that's one of the things I think, especially again for the new hobbyist, to your earlier point, find somebody who has that recipe that works, that you like their stuff, and then just, again, don't question it. Just go from there, do your research. So.
And it all goes back to the troubleshooting. Like, someone that we just, I guess, a new client or someone that we started selling SPS to, I was like, I'm saying, how's your tank, whatever, because we want to know, we really do want to help. Like, we answer every single question, PM, you'll see it comes right in, we message. We're not really like that responsive on YouTube yet. So if you message us there, we might not get back to you so quick. But, someone said, my torches are not looking good. They're shriveling up, they're dying. I'm like, well, what's your PO4? Because we know that if the PO4 is under like 0.03, like your torches are not going to look good. That just happened to us. We got lazy, whatever. It happens to all of us. PO4 went to 0.03. A couple torches died. They all retracted. What's going on? Oh, PO4 is 0.03. Okay. We started dosing it like crazy. Somebody, that we talked to, they said, I said, what's your PO4? They said, oh, it's really low. I said, oh, you're going to have to start dosing PO4. And then they said, oh, you know, we use GFO. I said, oh. I said, before you start dosing, I said, start taking the GFO offline, right? Because you want to get down to the basic, because that way there's less to try to, you know, figure out. So we're winding him now off of his you know, his GFO. You don't want to just take it offline, right? You want to drip it slower. Maybe if it's dripping, you know, 2 bubbles per second, drip 1 bubble per second and bring it back. And then even with him, you know, yeah, I said the next thing, you know, you're going to want to start to control your feeding. How do you feed, you know? And he's now going to try the American Reef HPD, and I'm sure he'll see, you know, the results that way.
Right. Yeah, you know, it's funny is you kind of describe that, you know, through the years, one of the things that I know Mike has said through the videos a lot of times, nothing good happens fast.
Yeah.
Right. And so to your point again, for the new hobbyist out there, make sure you take Shane's advice, right? You know, those just take things offline, right? Although the other interesting thing too is there used to be a gentleman, his name was Anthony Calfo. Have you ever read any of his stuff?
I've come across him.
So he was early on, I want to say in the 90s, he was kind of one of the original coral farmers, right? And he always used to talk about, again, keeping nutrients in suspension till you can export them, right? Your approach is not quite that way. You're saying, listen, don't get the nutrients in there that need to be exported. Control that. And then you control how much nutrients you want in there. So, you know, versus that taking it all out and figuring out a way to keep solids in suspensions and all that sort of stuff, right? It still gets at the same result, but it's totally different. It's a different approach, because I know in his world, he used to feed. Like he would just constantly, and, you know, but then he had deep sand beds, basically, to kind of keep the nitrates in check and all that sort of stuff. And then you had to worry about that because, again, you know, like with the Miracle Mud, to your point, if it's used properly, it works great. But if it's not, then it's a nutrient sink, right? So interesting how, it's 30 years now, right? But it's still that concept.